One of the things we're kind of known for at this point on this channel is making games in very short development cycles. We've made horror games in 1 month, we've made horror games in like a few months, and we've made a multiplayer streamer bait game in also just 1 month. But this is still kind of slow, you know, we need to keep going faster if we want to stay competitive in the current gaming industry. And why not just go straight to that final frontier of game development? Making everyone's dream game an MMO in just 7 days, let's say? That's exactly what we did. And in this video, I'm going to talk all about how we did it, why we did it, and if you should do it as well. And it's brought to you by Planetary Processing, because I'm going to be honest, the multiplayer part alone could probably have taken like 2-3 weeks, maybe even longer. We were not going to deal with that. We also had to make the rest of the game. So we're going to talk about how they helped us throughout this video as well, with things like networking and making sure that we could actually hit that 7-day deadline. Now, the first question, of course, is what kind of game are we even going to be making? Because there was a whole bunch of ideas and we kind of wanted to make something that wasn't overly generic. The most common thing, of course, would be to make your World of Warcrafts or whatever a more fantasy-inspired, like fantasy medieval style game with swords and magic and all of that. But I'm like, nah, it's kind of been overdone. Why not do something more specific? And that first idea that we then had was like, oh, what if we could have this awesome multiplayer MMO space game? And then I thought about it and I was like, no, actually, this is a dumb idea because 2 dimensions is already hard enough. Let's now not increase it to 3 dimensions and then all of the extra scope requirements that came with it. So we kept on looking. And one concept that I think is really interesting and has a good visual standout factor is more of that Mad Max style, you know, desert roadrunners, wasteland, apocalypse, zombies, whatever. So we decided that was gonna be it. The original idea was a wasteland delivery game. And did we reach this? Not exactly, but the goal was simple. You were going to be driving around in your little cars and then you could go and deliver quests, or you could get like, you know, you had like the different factions, the Ravagers and whatever that could stop you. We didn't implement all of this, but definitely that was the initial loadout. Now, once we decided on getting that game idea, we actually still needed to implement it, of course. For this game, we're going to be doing everything in Unity 6, but Godot fanboys, Unreal fanboys, every game engine basically you can think of, also Love 2D and Default, rejoice, because what we're going to be talking about, especially in terms of the MMO aspect, is completely possible in your engine as well. Planetary Processing is cross-platform. We're just using Unity because that's our engine basically. And the initial setup was really simple. We just started a brand new Unity 6 project. We took some Synthi assets that we felt like honestly fit the vibe really well. There's like Synthi Apocalypse Wasteland. We threw those in the game and then we immediately started with the MMO aspect. We shouldn't wait too long with this, and this is where that Planetary Processing definitely saved us a lot of time, I would say, because getting the multiplayer up and running literally took like 10 minutes basically. All you do is you add a game object, you add your server entity that you can get from your dashboard, and then you decide like, hey, this is my player prefab or game object. Once again, in your engine it might be slightly different, but the overall thought is simple. You assign it and voila, you have a multiplayer game already. People can join it. It is as simple as just saying multiplayer.join basically, and you can now have multiplayer in your game. Now, of course, just having multiple characters like fall into the scene didn't make sense. We needed to make sure that you could actually play the game. And like I said, we're not doing players exactly. There's gonna be a bit of an issue later on. This is what we've learned now, but we'll talk about it at the end. We were going to have cars immediately be the player. So that also meant car controllers. So we created a simple script. We put it on the car so they could go forward. We added multiple gears. We added a reverse gear. You had like the whole torque and horsepower and whatever configured. And then getting that movement synced was actually once again as simple as simply submitting the like position data through our car controller to the server of like, hey, this is where I am at right now. Now, we did client side. You can also do server side. That's probably a bit safer for things like security and whatever, because right now the server just assumes that whatever the car says that their position is, that has to be true, right? They wouldn't lie to me. In reality, cheaters do exist, so you do want to watch out with that. But now we can already move around. And this was still honestly like day 1 of development. So we felt like, yes, we were making a lot of progress. And this is also where that first kind of roadblock came in, is what I've realized. And one of the reasons why I don't think going for a car is really simple, at least not in Unity. Oh my God, wheel colliders. They are the bane of me. They are so much pain to set up correctly, and I feel like we could have spent more than a week just setting up the wheel colliders on its own and setting up all of those values. because honestly it felt more like we were ice skating in 0G, especially in those first builds of the game, compared to, you know, that more rugged, dragged down feeling of driving on the wasteland, basically. The big sand dunes and all of that. We did end up spending, like, I would say a full day trying to get the cars working and to try to get the mechanics working. And once we had like one car working, we then expanded upon that, because what's the point of an MMO if everyone has the same just car, basically, the same class? We figured let's make a bunch of different cars, a bunch of different classes. So we had like big tanky monster trucks, and then we had like very light, like an agile and nimble, like three-wheeler cars. They had some different mechanics in terms of how did they operate. Once again, physics, not my strong suit, definitely wonky. Let's keep it at that. Okay, great. We've got the cars kind of functional now. We have our different kinds of cars, but it wasn't really a game yet, because what was the point? You just spawned in and you drive around for a few minutes and it's like, okay, we've driven around, but there was nothing to do yet. So now we came to the harder part of game development, and it is just making a fun game to begin with. We had a few ideas here on how do you make this game more interesting while staying in that very, very short time period? And the first thing we had to do is, okay, let's look at some other MMOs and what are they kind of known for? What do they do really well? So we added fetch quests, very simple quests where you just had to drive to one location and then pick up an item and then drive it to another location. Going more into that courier aspect. And once again, that idea was that you could basically choose between two factions, the people who still worked and then the lawless ravengers or whatever, who just wanted to steal the stuff that you were carrying. So, okay, we've got the transporting stuff out of the way. Now we needed to have a way to die, basically, to have that more fun Ravager style gameplay as well. So one of the things that we saw was, hey, there's a new Mario Kart that's been announced for Switch 2, and one of the things that we're gonna have was also that more open world style. So why don't we just implemented item crates as well, with things like boosts, power-ups and bombs that you could pick up throughout the level and then destroy other cars with that, basically. Leave them traps and all of that. It was gonna be a hoot. So we added a bomb mechanic, we added a boost mechanic, so you could just go fly off into the distance. And one of the things we wanted to do here is we wanted to have security, I guess is what it came down to, because we wanted to be able to control how many bombs are there. Maybe we want to lock them behind microtransactions or something later on as well. How do we do this? Because this is something that is a bit hard to do in engine, but this is where that planetary processing came through again, because they have some really robust server-side code and server-side logic as well. So instead of spawning the game objects for our crates basically locally for every player and every instance, they were gonna be server managed, which meant that the server was just going to decide these are the positions that they're gonna be put at. They're gonna be tracked even if there's nobody in the game, so to say. They're gonna keep existing, and then we can validate with 100% certainty if someone picked up the item that they were actually fairly on the item and they could actually pick it up. There's a whole Lua backend basically where you can configure all these things. You can configure things like your spawn rates and all of that. One benefit of this as well is that you can update the spawn points and all of that without having to update the game itself. Let's say that one day we decide that actually we've been giving players way too much free stuff. We can just change the drop rate from our spawn crates, for example, to just 10% instead of, let's say, 100%. And we wouldn't have to push an update to our players, which means that you can now finally make the live services game that you've always been dreaming of. And that was basically all the development time that we had. So now it was time to actually try out the game and see, does this work? Because it's all fine and well for me to say like, oh yeah, we have a multiplayer game. Look, here is me and here is another player and we have multiplayer, right? And it's two people. At the end of the day, two people is not really what you think about when you hear epic MMO. You think about those 10,000 player instances and all of that, where it's an entire continent basically being filled up. We wanted to replicate that experience. And who better to invite for that than you guys, our viewers, who have a talent for truly breaking our games and stress testing it. So that's exactly what we did. We uploaded a build to itch.io and then we announced a live stream of like, hey guys, come and stress test this game with us. And I think we had like 150 people who were tuned in live. I think our server had like 40 players at the same time concurrently, and it didn't go great. There were definitely some mistakes on our end that we made, but honestly, I was surprised by how the joining kind of did hold up at the end of the day, because there was suddenly a very big spike and there were some issues. Like I said, the main one was that we didn't think about one of the big problems with having cars as your players. and it is that cars are kind of fast. Let's say we have a car going at 100 kilometers an hour. If that only has a tick speed of, for example, 30 ticks a second, and this is something that you can change in the planetary processing dashboard if you want, of course, that means that in that 1/30th of a second, a car can actually move multiple times their entire length if they're going at full speed, which gives more of that stuttery, jittery feel, like for example, correctly interpolating between their positions and all of that. We didn't end up doing that. Hindsight is 2020, so don't make that same mistake. If you are making something with high-speed cars and vehicles and spaceships or whatever, do keep in mind that no, stuff goes fast and you need to take care of that. This is the first time we're diving into MMO development, so things were definitely gonna be not as expected. I think the game design, for example, also is not as expected. I would hazard a guess and say that absolutely nobody tried to even deliver a single like parcel, basically. Everyone was just going for the crates, trying to get bombs and then blow us up, which was a hoot on its own, but definitely not the initial intention that we had. Overall, I would call this a success of an MMO for having been made in 7 days. Now, does that mean that this is going to be the next game that we're going to be making and I'm now going to announce that the Steam page is live? No, absolutely not. I think there was a lot of flawed game design in this idea, but I think it was still really cool to showcase the multiplayer part, because multiplayer is something that I do believe can have a really good like multiplying effect basically for your game, because any game is honestly better with multiplayer. The amount of time and effort often that is required to make a game multiplayer, and then especially make it large-scale multiplayer, that is a whole different story, but tools like planetary processing do make it a lot easier to do all of this. They have a whole bunch of other features that, once again, because of the scope, we didn't touch upon, but that are really cool. Like, for example, dimensions. So let's say you and your friends are going from the overworld into a dungeon. You can have this as basically a separate layer that they manage all of the handovers and things like that for you. You don't have to track any of that. If someone logs out in a dimension and then they log back in, where does that go and whatever. Also a better physics engine and having chunks, so you don't need to load up the entire game basically, but you can still persist things like NPCs in the background even though nobody's immediately interacting with them. They have a lot of cool stuff. And the coolest thing of all, honestly, is that they're completely free to get started with. The entire development of your MMO, basically, you can do completely for free, because they have up to 10 players completely for free. Only basically once you go into production and you want to test higher numbers, that's when you have to pay for it. And the good news here is that it's honestly really cheap. They have a calculator on their website, so you can see if you have 1,000 players, for example, they're going to be playing every single day, how much it's going to cost you. So now that I am a certified MMO developer, what are my final top tips for you basically if you want to make an MMO? I think the first big mistake we did is the game idea. That idea initially of the setting was pretty good, but I don't think we thought enough about what is the full game going to be basically, and what are the different mechanics going to be. Because like I said, nobody really cared about the transport mechanics. You want to think about these things up front. And something else that you need to think about, and this is genuine advice if you are making an MMO as well, is think about your monetization more. This is something we didn't run into, of course, because this was more of a temporary project, but running a MMO game means you have recurring server costs, and probably getting a one-time purchase on Steam is not going to be enough to run that entire process, which I think is fine, but I think it's better than to think about how we're gonna monetize and all of that right at the beginning, before you actually start working on the game, so you don't just tack on like microtransactions and whatever later on once you realize, hey, we kind of need to make money. Making an MMO definitely is a bit different than making any other style of indie game, and definitely it's probably not going to be for everyone's first game, but I do want to just say one big thank you once again to Planetary Processing, because it's cool guys like them. Like, we've made a video about them before as well, where I just talked with the founder of the studio, like, why do you do this and all of that. They're just indies who want to see more cool MMOs in the world. They're very approachable as well, so if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts or whatever, and you're trying this out, they're super approachable. There's a link down below to their Discord as well, where you can just go and ask your question, no matter what the engine is basically, and they're going to help you out. So I just want to say thank you once again to them for sponsoring this video, for funding our antics of making an MMO in 7 days. I think we've definitely learned a lot also just about rapid prototyping. I think we're gonna stick to 1 month minimum dev cycles for future games though, but I think the fact that anyone can make this style of games at this point very easily is just really cool and really empowering. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope this was informative. If you did join the Rust Realm test livestream, I'm curious, how was the experience for you as well? Leave a comment down below. And apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next one.